All right, for meditation, I've chosen some words from Rebecca Ann Parker. In the midst of a world marked by tragedy and beauty, there must be those who bear witness against unnecessary destruction, and who with faith rise and lead in freedom, with grace and power. There must be those who speak honestly and do not avoid seeing what must be seen. Of sorrow and outrage, or tenderness and wonder. There must be those whose grief troubles the water, while their voices sing and speak refreshed worlds. There must be those who are restless for respectful and loving companionship among human beings, whose presence invites people to be themselves without fear. And there must be communities of people who seek to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God, who call on the strength of soul force to heal, transform, and bless life. There must be religious witness. And if you could join me now in a few moments of reflective silence. Okay, you can come back here now. I just want to say, reflecting on the meditation, one of the things I really come to appreciate is how important community is to be on a journey, especially a journey that is fraught with challenges. You know, it is so hard to continue that effort when there aren't like-minded people to share the burdens with, and also just to share the journey. I mean, it's not necessary that they so much do the work as that they support my own or your own thoughts on going in that particular direction. Okay, we're going to start. Get away from me. Just a reminder that what we're dealing with, at least from my point of view, is a revisiting of the 21-day challenge that Tammy issued to us several years ago, certainly more than 21 days ago. I've kind of ended up looking at it myself as a 21 generation challenge because it's been a challenge for us at least that long in so many ways. And, you know, that I'm not a big fan of social justice activities. That's not where my prime focus is, but it is a secondary focus. And when I see people being demeaned for no good reason, other than somebody thought they deserved to be demeaned some time ago, we just haven't gotten out of that habit. It's nice to continue having the inspiration that I have to work towards social justice as much as I'm willing to. And that's what this is for. So last week we heard Baldwin, and he presented some of his ideas on why the proposition, which says the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, was a supportable proposition. And now Baldwin is here to I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm going to anyway, to sort of argue the contrary feeling. And I've listened to it several times and I'm no longer offended by it, but it's interesting to think through as I listen to his words and his ideas. Think through the perspectives that I have learned about racial justice in particular, and how much of the anti-racism approach he takes with the stuff that he says. But that's just my take on it. You may have a different one. So let me go and adjust where we are on this thing. And oops, we'll get the boys in here first.
Tonight is the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro. We proposed Mr. David Haycock of Pembroke College and upwards Mr. Jeremy Burke of Emmanuel College. Mr. James Baldwin will speak third. Mr. William Buckley Jr. will speak fourth. Mr. Haycock is the ear of the House. Mr. President, it is the custom of the House for the first speaker in any debate to extend a formal welcome to any visitors to the House. I can honestly say, however, that it is a very great honour to be able to welcome to the House this evening Mr. William Buckley and Mr. James Baldwin. Mr. William Buckley has a reputation of possibly being the most articulate conservative in the United States of America. He was a graduate of Yale and he first gained a reputation for himself by publishing a book entitled God and Man and Yale. Since then, he has devoted himself to the secular, and this has included Norman Mailer, Kenneth Tynan, Mary McCarthy, and Fidel Castro, some of whom have come out of their confrontations unscathed. At present, his principal occupation is editing a right-wing newspaper in the United States entitled the National Review. Mr. James Baldwin is hardly need of introduction. His reputation both as a novelist and as an advocate of civil rights is international. His film On Another Country has been published in a paperback in England today. Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Buckley are both very welcome to the House this evening. Imagine, Mr. President, a society which above all values freedom and equality. A society in which artificial barriers to fulfillment and achievement are unheard of. A society in which a man may begin his life as a rail splitter and end it as president. A society in which all men are free in every sensible way. Free to live where they choose, free to work where they choose. Equal in the eyes of the law and every public authority, and equal in the eyes of their parents. A society, in fact, in which intolerance and prejudice are meaningless terms. Imagine, however, Mr. President, but the condition of this utopia has been the persistent and quite deliberate exploitation of 1/9 of its inhabitants. That 1/9 has been denied those rights which the rest of that society takes for granted. That 1/9 does not have a chance for fulfillment or realization of his innate potentiality. That 1/9 cannot promise his children a secure future and unlimited opportunity. Imagine this, Mr. President, and you have what is, in my opinion, the bitter reality of the American dream. A few weeks ago, Martin Luther King had to hold a non-violent demonstration in Selma, Alabama, in strive to register Negro voters. By the end of the week of his demonstrations, he was able to write quite accurately in a national fundraising letter from Selma, Alabama jail, "There are more Negroes in prison with me than there are on the voting roll." When King wrote that letter, 335 out of 32,700 Negroes in Dallas had the vote, 1% of the Dallas population. After a mass march to the courthouse, 237 Negroes, King among them, were arrested. The following day, 470 children who had deserted their classrooms to protest against King's arrest were charged with juvenile delinquency. 36 adults on the same day were charged with contempt of court for picketing the courthouse while State Circuit Court is in session. On the following day, 111 people were arrested on the same charge, despite their claim that they merely wanted to see the voting register. 400 students were arrested and taken to the armory, where many of them spent the night on a cold cement floor. The following day, the demonstration spread to Marion, Alabama. In Marion, Negroes outnumber whites by 11,500 to 6,000 people, and yet only 300 are registered to vote. Negroes in Marion were anxious to test the public accommodation section of the civil rights law. They entered a drugstore, and there they were served with Coca-Cola laced with salt, and were told that hamburgers had risen to $5 each. After the arrest of 15 Negroes for protesting against this treatment, 700 Negroes boycotted their classes next day and marched in orderly fashion to the jail. There they sang civil rights songs until they were warned by a state trooper that they would be arrested if they sang one more song. Of course, they sang another song, and of course, all 700 were arrested. Medical Society has felt fit to use Negro labor. It is so fit to use the blood of the Negro in 2 world wars. It is so fit to listen to his music. It is not fit to laugh at his jokes. And yet, as far as I am concerned, it has never been fit to give the American Negro a fair deal. And for this reason, Mr. President, I would beg leave to propose the motion that the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro.
I now call Jeremy Burton of the Manual College to oppose the motion.
Now I have Mr. Jeremy Burton of the Manual College, who is the first undergraduate proposing the motion.
James Baldwin is well known as one of the most vivid and articulate writers about the Negro problem in America. Mr. Baldwin had a difficult childhood, and he has personally himself suffered discrimination and ill treatment in the South of America. But I would like to say at this time that it is not the purpose of this side of the House to condone that in any way at all. It is not our purpose to oppose civil rights. It is our purpose to oppose this motion. Thank you, sir. Come and collect your fee afterwards. This side of the House denies that the American dream has in any way been helped by this undoubted inequality and suffering of the Negro. We maintain that, in fact, it has hindered the American dream. And if there had been equality, if there had been true freedom of opportunity, the American dream would be very much more advanced than it is now. If the American dream has made any progress, and I think it has been made in spite of the suffering and inequality of the American Negro, and not because of it. Now, it is also implied in this motion that the American dream is encouraging and worsening the suffering of the American Negro. This is emphatically not the case. The American dream, the American economic prosperity and respect for civil liberties, has been the main factor in bringing about the undoubted improvement in race relations in America in the last 20 years. And Professor Arnold Rose, who is the author of The Negro in America, which is perhaps the definitive work on the subject, who is also a contributor to what was called a freedom pamphlet, so I can imagine that if he has any bias at all, he's in favor of the Negro. He said that this improvement in race relations will be seen in years to come as remarkably quick, and he has put it down to 3 main causes: increased industrialization and technical advance, the increased social mobility of the American people, and the economic prosperity. And I would put it to this House that industrialization and economic prosperity are 2 of the main ingredients of the American dream. And at the same time, again, I do not want to say that the Negro in America is treated fairly, but at the same time, the average per capita income of Negroes in America is exactly the same as the average per capita income of people in Great Britain. Now, I found that absolutely amazing. I understand that some people do as well, so I have got the reference here. From the United States News and World Report, July the 22nd, 1963, in which it points out this will have to be the last interruption I take, the time is running.
Mr. President, my point of information is the speaker talking of real income or money income.
Unfortunately, my income, I would not wish to disguise that. I would also say, in terms of this, there are only 5 countries in the world where the income is higher than that of the American Negro. And they do not include countries like West Germany and France and Japan. Now, there are in America 35 Negro millionaires. There are Negro 6,000 and so on. Now, I do not, by saying this, wish to emphasize that the Negro is fairly treated. I merely wish to try and convey a more realistic and objective account of the situation of the Negro. Well, I agree that there are Negroes who are very poor indeed, such as the old gentleman in the South who who was talking about some of his welfare brethren. He was saying, yes, some of these rich Negroes, they put on airs, they're like the bottom figure of the fraction. The bigger they can be, the smaller they really are. I would repeat, Mr. President, sir, in the last minute I have, that this debate is not whether civil rights would be extended to American Negroes or not. If it were, it would be a very easy motion to argue for and a very easy motion to vote for. The debate tonight concerns whether the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro. That is, whether the American Negro has paid the American dream with his suffering, or whether the American dream has furthered Negro inequality. And I would deny those two precepts. I would say that Negro inequality has hindered the American dream, and I would say that the American dream has been very important indeed in furthering civil rights and in furthering freedom for the American Negro. Mr. President, I beg to offer a submission.
And now we'll hear from the other opposer of the motion, William Buckley. Get to him.
That there's a sentence here of his audience, which has clearly been so deeply.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Eloquence and personal experience of the preceding speaker.
Take our further gentlemen. It seems to me that of all the indictments Mr. Baldwin has made of America, by here tonight and in his copious literature of protests, but the one that is most striking involves the fact that the refusal of the American community to treat him other than as a Negro. But the American community has refused to do this. The American community, almost everywhere he goes, treats him with the kind of unction, the kind of satisfaction at posturing carefully for his flagellation falsification, that indeed, quite properly, commands the contempt which he so eloquently showers upon. It is impossible, in my judgment, to deal with the indictment of Mr. Baldwin unless one is prepared to deal with him as a white man. Unless one is prepared to say to him, the fact that your skin is black is utterly irrelevant to the arguments you raise. The fact that you sit here as is your rhetorical defiance, and laying the entire weight of the Negro ordeal on your own shoulders, is irrelevant to the argument that we are here to discuss. The gravamen of Mr. Baldwin's charges against America are not so much that our civilization has failed him and his people, that our ideals are insufficient, but that we have no ideals. That our ideals rather are some sort of a superficial coating which we come up with at any given moment in order to justify whatever commercial and noxious experiment we are engaged in. Thus, Mr. Baldwin can write his book, The Fire Next Time, in which he threatens America. He didn't, in writing that book, speak with the British accents that he used exclusively tonight, but in which he threatened America with necessity for us to jettison our entire civilization. The only thing that the white man has that the Negro should want, he said, is power. And he is treated from coast to coast in the United States with a kind of
It doesn't choose to give way the interruption, and he has done interrupted now said
goes beyond anything that was ever expected from the most servile Negro creature by us other than. I propose to pay him the honor this night of saying to Mr. Baldwin, I am going to speak to you without any reference whatever to those surrounding protections which you are used to in virtue of the fact that you are a Negro. And here we need to ask the question, what in fact shall we allow at present? What shall we in America try to do? For instance, to eliminate those psychic humiliations which I join Mr. Baldwin in believing are the very worst aspects of this discrimination. You found it a source of considerable mirth to outweigh the statistics of my colleague Wilford. I don't think they are insignificant, but they are certainly not insignificant in a world which attaches a considerable importance to material progress. It is in fact the case that 7/10 of the white income of the United States is equal to the income that is made by the average people. I don't think this is an irrelevant statistic, ladies and gentlemen. But it takes a capitalization of $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 per job in the United States. This is capitalization that was not created exclusively as a result of Negro travail. My great-grandparents worked too, presumably yours worked also. I don't know if anything has ever been created without the expense of something. All of you who hope for a diploma here are going to do that at the expense of a considerable amount of effort. And I will thank you. Please not to belie the fact that a considerable amount of effort went into the production of a system which grants a greater degree of material well-being to the American Negro than that is enjoyed by 95% of the other peoples of the human race. But even so, to the extent that your withering laughter suggested here that you found this a contemptible observation, I agree. I don't think it matters that there are 35 millionaires among the Negro community. If there were 20 million millionaires among the Negro community of the United States, I would still agree with you that we have a dastardly situation. But I'm asking you not to make politics as the crow flies, to use the fleeted phrase of Professor Oakeshott, but rather to consider what in fact is it we Americans ought to do. What are your instructions that I'm to take back to the United States, my friend? I want to know what it is that we should do. And especially I want to know whether it is time, in fact, to abandon the American dream as it has been defined by Mr. Haycock and Mr. Mercer. What, in fact, is it we ought to do, for instance, to avoid due humiliation mentioned by Mr. Baldwin as being a part of his own experience during his lifetime. At the age of 12, you will find on reading this book, he trespassed outside the ghetto of Harlem and was taken by the scruff of the neck by a policeman on 42nd Street, Madison Avenue, and said, "Here, you nigger, go back to where you belong." 15, 20 years later, he goes in and asks for a Scotch whiskey at the airport at Chicago and is told by the white barman that he is obviously underage and under the circumstances cannot be served. I know from your faces that you share with me the feeling of compassion and the feeling of outrage that this kind of thing should have happened. What, in fact, are we going to do to this policeman? And what, in fact, are we going to do to this foreman? How are we going to avoid the kind of humiliations that are perpetually visited on members of a minority race? Obviously, the first element is concern. We've got to care that it happens. We have got to do what we can to change the warp and woof of moral thought in society in such fashion as to try to make it happen less and less. Let me urge this point to you, which I can do with authority, my friend, the only thing that I can admit. And that is to tell you that in the United States, there is a concern for the Negro problem. Now, if you get up to me and say, if you get up to me and say, well, now, is there the kind of concern that we students of Cambridge show is the problem we're on home? All I can say is I don't know. It may very well be that there has been some sort of a sunburst moral enlightenment that has hit this community, so as to make it predictable that if you were the governors of the United States, the situation would change overnight. I'm prepared to grant this as a form of courtesy, Mr. President. But meanwhile, I'm saying to you that the engines of concern in the United States are working. The presence of Mr. Baldwin here tonight is in part a reflection of that concern. You cannot go to a university in the United States, a university in the United States, presumably also governed by the Lord spiritual as you are, in which Mr. Baldwin is not the toast of the town. You cannot go to a university of the United States in which practically all other problems of public policy are preempted by the primary policy of concern for the Negro. I challenge you to name me another civilization, anytime, anywhere in the history of the world, in which the problems of a minority, which have been showing considerable material and political advancement, is as much a subject of dramatic concern as it is in the United States. But let me just say finally, ladies and gentlemen, this. There is no instant cure for the race problem in America. And anybody who tells you that there is a charlatan and ultimately a boring man. Boring precisely because he is then speaking in the kind of abstractions that do not relate to the human experience. The trouble in America where the Negro community is concerned is a very complicated one. I urge those of you who have an actual rather than a purely ideologized interest in the problem to read the book Beyond the Melting Pot by Professor Glaser, also co-author of The Lonely Crowd, a prominent Jewish intellectual, who points to the fact that the situation in America where the Negroes are concerned is extremely complex as a result of an unfortunate conjunction of two factors. One is the dreadful efforts to perpetuate discrimination by many individual American citizens as a result of their lack of that final and ultimate concern which some people are truly trying to agitate the other. Is as a result of the failure of the Negro community itself to make certain exertions which were made by other minority groups during the American experience. If you can stand a statistic not of my own making, let me give you one which Professor Glaser considers as relevant. He says, for instance, in 1900, there were 3,500 Negro doctors in America. In 1960, there were 3,900, an increase in 400. Is this because there were no opportunities, as has been suggested by Mr. Haycock and also by Mr. Baldwin implicitly? No, says Professor Glaser. But there are a great many medical schools who are by no means practice discrimination, who are anxious to receive, to train Negro doctors. There are scholarships available to put them through, but in fact that particular energy which he remarks was so noticeable in the Jewish community and to a certain and lesser extent in the Italian-Irish community, for some reason is not there. We should focus on the necessity to animate this particular energy, but he comes to the conclusion, which strikes me as plausible, that the people who can best do it, who can do it most effectively, are Negroes themselves. Let me conclude by reminding you, ladies and gentlemen, that where the Negro is concerned, the danger, as far as I can see at this moment, is that they will seek to reach out for some sort of radical solutions on the basis of which the true problem is obscure. They have done a great deal to focus on the fact of white discrimination against Negroes. They have done a great deal to agitate a moral concern, but where, in fact, do they go now? They seem to be slipping, if you read carefully, for instance, the words of Mr. David Ruskin, towards some sort of a Procrustean formulation which ends up less urging the advancement of the Negro than the regression of the people. 14 times as many people in New York City born of Negroes are illegitimate as of whites. This is a problem. How shall we address it? By seeking out laws that encourage illegitimacy in white people? This, unfortunately, tends to be the rhetorical momentum that some of their arguments are taking.
one thing you might do, Mr. Buckley, is let them vote Mississippi.
I couldn't agree with you more for, except unless I appear too ingratiating, which is hardly my objective here tonight. I think actually what is wrong in Mississippi, sir, is not enough Negroes voting, but too many white people are voting. Booker T. Washington said that the important thing where Negroes are concerned is not that they hold public office, but that they be prepared to hold public office. Not that they vote, but that they be prepared to vote. What are we going to do with the Negroes, having taught the Negroes in Mississippi to despise Barnett? Barnett, shall we then teach them to emulate their cousins in Harlem and adore having taken power in them? But it is much more complicated, sir, than simply the question of giving vote. If I were myself a constituent of the community in Mississippi at this moment, what I would do is vote to lift the standards of the vote so as to disqualify 65% of the white people who are presently voting. Not simply to give them. Well, I say then that what we need is a considerable amount of practice that acknowledges that there are two sets of difficulties. The difficulties of the white person who acts as white people and brown people and black people do all over the world to protect their own vested interests, who have, as all races in the entire world have, and suffer from a kind of a racial narcissism, which tends always to convert every contingency in such a way as to maximize their own power. That, yes, we must do. But we must also reach through to the Negro people and tell them that their best chances are in a mobile society. And the most mobile society in the world today, my friends, is the United States of America. The most mobile society in the United States, in the world is the United States of America, and it is precisely that mobility which will give opportunities to Negroes, which they must be encouraged to take. But they must not, in the course of their ordeal, be encouraged to adopt the kind of cynicism, the kind of despair, the kind of iconoclasm that is urged upon them by Mr. Baldwin in his recent works. Because one thing I can tell you, I believe with absolute authority, that where the United States is concerned, if it ever becomes a confrontation between a continuation of our own sort of idealism, the private soccer, granted, like most people in the world, we tend to lavish only every now and then on public enterprises, reserving it so often for our own irritations and pleasures. But the fundamental trend of the Negro people in the United States is the good nature, and is the generosity, and is the good wishes, is the decency, the fundamental decency that do lie at the reserves of the spirit of the American people. But these must not be laughed at. And under no circumstances must they be laughed at, and under no circumstances must America be addressed and told that the only alternative to the status quo is to overthrow that civilization which we consider to be the faith of our fathers, the faith indeed of your fathers. This is what must animate whatever meliorism must come, because if it does finally come to a confrontation, a radical confrontation between giving up what we understand to be the best features of the American way of life, which at that level is indistinguishable as far as I can see from the European way of life, then we will fight the issue. And we will fight the issue not only in the Cambridge Union, but we will fight it as you were once recently called to do on beaches and on hills and on mountains and on landing grounds. And we will be convinced that just as you won the war against a particular threat to civilization, you were nevertheless waging a war in favor of and for the benefit of Germans, your own enemies, just as we are convinced that if it should ever come to that kind of a confrontation, our own determination to win the struggle will be a determination to wage a war not only for whites, but also for Negroes.
Will the tellers take their places, please? They voted in favor of the motion being that the American dreams at the expense of the Negro. They voted in favor of that motion 544 persons and against 164 persons. The motion is therefore carried by 380 votes. I declare the House to stand adjourned.